Now in this video, we're going to paint a very simple tree using a basic round brush. Similar to how we started painting the leaves in the previous video, I'm going to start with a nice big round shape in the middle of our document. Remember again to press tab so that you can get your full canvas to paint on. Again, I'm using my textured round brush with the dual brush on, and making sure that my opacity is on full. I'm just going to start loosely painting in these round strokes and just creating a very general, simple outline of a tree. It can be any kind of tree that you prefer. Spring is just around the corner, so I want to create something that's very lush and full of life and looks very healthy and green. Right now in winter, all the trees are bare, so let's create something that is full of life and very rich with leaves and has a nice strong trunk. Now with the thin angled brush, I'm just kind of drawing around the edges just to add a little bit of interesting, design to the silhouette, so it feels more like a tree. Otherwise, if it was just round, it wouldn't read as nice. I'm taking inspiration from a very simple round kind of birch tree or an apple orchard tree, something with a thin trunk and a nice round bush of leaves on top of it. Now let's create a new layer, and selecting a nice big round brush, just like we did with the leaves, let's start adding in a little dimension to our tree. This is like where our light source would kind of be hitting the tree from the top. We're just going to add it in, coming from the top, and then with my eraser I'm going to erase it out again. Now a tree will always be darker on the bottom because this is the shadow part of the tree. It is not getting much light from below, so we're going to make sure that this part is a little darker, and I'm just going to kind of add in these round shapes, just giving a very loose feel of where the leaves might be. And now with the big brush, making sure my dual brush isn't selected, I'm just going to loosely erase out the bottom part very lightly. Make sure that your feathering is also on your brush so that you get a nice soft edge. And now let's start painting in the trunk. I've selected a very nice dark brown, and with a thin angled brush I'm going to just start painting in some very thin strokes. I want to make sure that my opacity is higher so that I don't keep painting over and over my strokes. And now that I've painted in a nice thin trunk with my eraser, I'm just gonna using of course the jagged brush in this case, I want to give it a nice loose painterly feel but yet have these sharp edges to it, similar to what I did with the leaves. And now let's add a little branch coming out over here, and maybe one on the other side to just balance it out, just so that the tree feels a little more fuller, otherwise the trunk will look too thin. Down the Command or Control key on my keyboard, I'm going to select the layer that the trunk is on. This creates a selection around it. Then with a nice light brown and using my full round brush, I'm going to add in the highlight kind of coming in from the top, just like I did with the tree and the leaves earlier. Thin angled brush, I'm just going to paint in some lines. This is just going to give an indication and add some texture of the tree bark on the branch, on the trunk. Now, I think I want to create a nice gray neutral background to paint on. I think the white is a little too bright right now. This is something to always remember whenever you're painting any assets or props. Start out with a neutral gray background. This really helps with painting because starting out on a neutral layer kind of helps you have a better idea of what your colors would look like. Sometimes on white you could paint something and it wouldn't look as bright as it normally would on a neutral background, because of course whenever we create our trees and put them in our environment, they won't always be on such a white background. So we want to make sure to add in this little bit of this big step. New layer, I have added in a lighter green texture, and it's really kind of bringing in definition to my tree. I'm going to create these loose thin marks and kind of paint them in toward the middle of the tree, and this also just creates an illusion of leaves. I'm also going to select the darker green at the bottom and kind of paint it in toward the top. Now on a new layer with an even lighter green, I'm going to loosely paint in some strokes, and then I'm going to just start adding in some outlines of where the leaves may be, etc. This is like the extreme highlight of our tree. I'm also using the eraser to erase out shapes as I'm painting. To create a smoother transition, I'm just going to adjust the opacity a little bit on that layer, and with a nice big brush, no dual brush with a feathered edge, I'm going to use that same green and just loosely paint it in over here. That really kind of creates a better gradient for my tree and doesn't make it look so rough and, you know, stark and edgy. And now on a new layer, again holding down Command or Control on your keyboard, I'm going to select the layer that the trunk is on, change it to overlay, and using a nice light brown, I'm going to paint in some more definition to the tree bark. This is just me adding the final touches to this tree. And there you have it. This is how you paint a very basic, simple, stylized tree in Photoshop. This is for, you know, creating a very swift process for if you have to concept out trees for a video game or a movie or a TV show. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create another tree in a similar fashion with slightly different technique. And we're going to use some brighter colors this time.